Hello, and welcome back to this episode of the Breadwinner Podcast. I'm your host, Caroline, and this is the show where we talk about all things sourdough microbakery. And this episode is part 2 of a 3-part series talking all about markets. Going to be a good one. We are going to answer a lot of the questions that I receive frequently from you all and dive into preparing for a market, how to know what to prepare, how to schedule your preparation, and some kind of tips and tricks that I found work, and I will summarize my method for knowing how much to take to a market. So if you haven't already listened to part 1, last week's episode was all about finding and choosing the right market. So that's a good place to start, especially if you are newer to sourdough business in general. That's a good one to kind of lay the foundation for this series. And before we dive in, a quick reminder that this series is supported by the Breadwinner Holiday Accelerator, which is a focused online mini event for 2 days at the end of October 28th and 29th, to hit pause just for a moment and work on your business instead of in it. To prepare for the busiest months of the year, November and December are notoriously extremely busy and notoriously prone to burnout. It's going to help you create a plan, gauge your capacity, prioritize, set goals, and just take a moment to make sure you're on track for a great holiday season that's not going to leave you feeling absolutely beat and lose the joy of this beautiful gift that baking is. So the Breadwinner Holiday Accelerator is free to join. There is an option to upgrade your ticket to get some extra bonuses, and you can find all of that in the link down in the show notes or at carolinebauer.com/holiday accelerator. I'm so excited. We have hundreds of bakers already joining us, and I hope you join us too. So let's go ahead and get into the planning side of market. This is a question that comes up so often, and when I invited questions from my followers on Instagram about this episode, several of you wanted to know how you know what to bring, how much to bake for a market. So following up from episode 1 of this series, once you've chosen your market and you know where you're showing up, the next big question is what to bring, how much to bring. And this is a fine art in a sense, a little bit of figuring out how much is the right amount without bringing home a lot of product and without missing out on a lot of opportunity if you sell out too soon. It's really common for bakers to either start out by bringing too much or selling out in the first hour. So eventually you'll find your rhythm. This is just a learning process in many ways. There's no scientific formula to say exactly how much you should bring. But the best way to start out is with an educated guess and some careful tracking. Let's start out by thinking about the products and the categories. So you can categorize your products into 3 groups. First would be staples that everyone buys and comes back week after week. So these would be your original sourdough loaves, maybe your sandwich loaves. For me, it would be pizza crust. A lot of people come back every week because maybe they have Thursday pizza night. Think about what are the staples that people want to replenish every week. And the second category would be seasonal or specialty items, things that you rotate. Maybe you bring in certain flavors certain times of the year, or you have a higher tier of product. This could look like a cinnamon swirl. For me, I have a blueberry lemon in springtime and a cranberry pecan in the winter, or a seeded loaf. You could have a kind of higher price point heritage grain bread, a specialty item. And then your third is your add-ons. These are things like scones, cookies, granola, crackers, cinnamon rolls, those little extras that are small and lower price. And people just impulsively grab them when they're paying usually, and that increases your average order value. So my strategy when I first started was to pay attention to what sold quickly, what sat around for a while, and what people asked a lot for. And those questions helped me gauge what to bring more of, what to introduce that I wasn't already bringing, and to kind of adjust week after week and find the balance. Now, this is ever changing. I found that as seasons ebb and flow, what they prefer changes. For example, in the summertime, I sell a lot more sandwich bread, and people don't buy the rustic loaves the batards nearly as much. And then it's flipped in the wintertime. They buy a lot more of the more hearty rustic breads to go with roasts and soups and things like that. And they still buy the sandwich bread, but not quite as much as during the summer. So once you think about the categories and how you can bring a little bit of a variety, the next step is to think about how much to actually bring. And then with those categories, you do not need to bring 10 items in each category. Less is more, especially when you're getting started and figuring out your rhythm and your capacity. So I would say start with what you feel really comfortable with and what you know you can bake well, and don't try to offer all the things all at once. I have very slowly added new products here and there, and things like my specialty or my flavored loaves, I rotate. So I usually don't have any more than 4 flavored loaves at a time. And sometimes that's more than I bring. Sometimes I only bring 2. But while I could bring 12 different flavored loaves, I've found that if I just rotate my flavors and pay attention to the top ones and lean into those, but then bring other flavors in addition without having to bring absolutely everything, that keeps people coming back because they want to see what my flavors are that week. But also, it keeps me from getting spread too thin trying to do 12 different flavors when I can just bring like my olive one week and my jalapeno cheddar another week and my garlic rosemary another week. And people maybe grab 2 loaves of their favorite to stock the freezer because they know it'll be a little while until it comes back around. So after you've thought about the categories, let's think about how much to actually make. So this is where a lot of bakers start to overthink and overanalyze and even just get stuck in the analysis and the questions of how much to bring and maybe never even sign up for a market. What I'll say is my advice is always to start smaller than you think, because it's better to sell out and build demand and build that hype and that energy and momentum than to have to bring home unsold product. There are general rules of thumb if you know the approximate foot traffic of your market to bring 10% of that. Let's say your market has about 500 people coming through, 10% would be 50 items. That is loose and hard to really predict because things like weather and sporting events and other things going on in the town can influence how many people show up at a given market. So that's not a hard and fast rule, and foot traffic can be hard to predict, but that's one rule of thumb. My favorite recommendation is just to start with your capacity. If you're just getting started and you are using Dutch ovens and you can bake 12 loaves at a time, but beyond that feels like way too much, start with 12 loaves. In all likelihood, you will sell out pretty quickly. And your next step then will be to get people on your text list or on your pre-order list so that they know where to find you next time, and post and share and thank people for selling you out and build that momentum and that scarcity and that excitement. And then go home and figure out how to scale up a little bit. But don't push yourself beyond your reasonable capacity too early. So start at your capacity. Maybe your capacity is 30 loaves. That's a great place to start. And then add on some cookies. I was looking back at the photo of my very first market. I had just one table, no signage. I had everything bagel bread. I had cinnamon raisin. I probably only had 4 or 5 or 6 of each of those. And then I had some original. That's all I brought, just those 3 flavors and chocolate chip cookies. And I think I brought a total of about 30 loaves. I was baking in Dutch ovens. I was shuffling. I know it took me ages to bake it all. And that was my capacity at that time. And then slowly, I have built up. So pretty quickly when I got started, I transitioned from Dutch ovens to a steel. And open baking on a steel allowed me to bake quite a bit more. I could bake 4 loaves instead of 2 or 3 at a time. And that allowed me to increase my capacity. And then eventually I got a double oven and then a better double oven. But it wasn't overnight. I didn't start out bringing 130 loaves of bread to a market. I started out at 20 or 30 because that's what I could manage. And that is where I began and started building my local market, building that momentum, building a reputation, and I have slowly increased over time. So my encouragement to you is just that. If you are just getting started and not sure how much to bake for a market, figure out how much you can reasonably bake and still sleep at night. So if your market is a Saturday morning, you're going to want to bake on Friday and be done baking, everything cooled in time for you to reasonably get a few hours of sleep. So don't try to bake more and pull an all-nighter just because you could bake more if you stayed up all night. That's not the right strategy. Bake less, sleep well, love what you're doing, and then slowly increase your capacity. If your capacity is high, but you still don't know how much to bring for a market, try to have a general idea of the foot traffic if you can. Ask the market organizer if they have an idea of how many people might come through, and maybe try that 10% benchmark. So if they say they anticipate 400 people coming through, you bring about 40 loaves of bread plus a few extras. If it's a brand new market and it has no history, err on the side of bringing less because those tend to be a little bit unpredictable. It could be totally gangbusters and everyone comes through right away and sells you out, and then you use that momentum and that hype and you get them on your list, and you know the drill. But in my experience, those one-off events, things like maybe a women's night or a church event or a yard sale, a community sale, things like that, don't tend to be like bonkers selling all the product out right away. It tends to be more of an outreach. Like we talked about in part 1 of this series, that would be the sort of event where you approach it as a marketing opportunity. You let people know who you are, how to find you, how to order from you, and where to find you consistently. So just gauge how much you bake. If you're unsure, pay attention to the type of event. If it's an event with a lot of history and a ton of foot traffic, maybe err on the higher side of your. If it's an event with very little history or just the first event of its kind and unknown foot traffic, err on less. Don't push yourself, bring less, and use that to inform yourself for the future. As you track and as the more you repeat this, the more you'll see patterns. You'll certain hours where sales spike, you'll be able to predict the flow of your market when you show up regularly at the same one. You'll notice that certain products move faster, certain ones tend to linger on your table a little bit longer. I find that my sandwich bread and my regular bread, since those are staples, they tend to linger just a little bit longer. And then I usually have a couple of flavored loaves left towards the end. And the things that sell the very quickest are my specialty items like my English muffins. And then if I bring some sort of special sweet that I teased on social media, for example, in one of my most recent markets, I brought a brioche bun with an apple and custard topping. Because in Texas, we can use custard now, finally. But those sold really fast because I had teased them a couple times on social media. So a lot of people came out specifically for those. So I can predict, I know if I'm bringing something special like that, and I have advertised it ahead of time on Instagram a little bit, people tend to come out early and sell that out fast. And I know my original loaves are generally, as long as I bring enough, they're going to stay a little bit longer. I don't think it's going to be super helpful for me to tell you all of my exact numbers, just because everyone's situation is different. So I will give you some specific insight into my numbers, my process in a second. But when I say if I bring enough original loaves, that could be totally different for your market and your capacity. I just have done this enough times that I know I need to bring about 40 original loaves or else they'll sell it too fast. But if I bring 60, I probably won't sell all of the originals at that market. I'll probably have to bring product home. So use those markets as living feedback loops. Every week gives you data for the next one. Know that if it's rainy, you probably won't have as much traffic. If there's a huge sports game, it might be less. If there's a big annual event in the town, you might see less traffic. If it is just an absolute gorgeous day, you might actually see less traffic. Counterintuitively, it seems like sometimes when those days are just absolutely perfect, people are out hiking or doing whatever they do, enjoying family time or soaking up that day rather than coming to a market. So there's no science. It changes so much, but that's an observation that I've seen a little bit. Another question that I had is, should I do pre-orders or have different pricing at markets? This is a good question, and this is totally personal preference. I didn't start offering pre-orders for pickup at the market until well into my second year. I chose to do pre-orders just for porch pickups, and then anyone who came to the market was just first come, first serve, and that was all just retail pickup. When I dropped one of my porch pickup days, I added pre-orders at the market because I didn't want people to have to sweat to get to the market early, especially if they were just getting staples. And so I put just my staples on my pre-order menu. I don't put those specialty items like the brioche buns or the English muffins. Most of the time, those are first come, first serve because I don't have the capacity to make enough to have both on the table as well as on the pre-order menu and give them both enough to choose from. So in general, the specialty items are first come, first serve. The staples like my sandwich bread, my original bread, my focaccia, and my dozen cookies are on the pre-order menu, and people can order those ahead of time, and they know that they have all the way until the end of the market to pick them up, and they don't have to worry about getting there first thing in the morning. Now, with the pre-orders, make it clear that orders do have to be picked up during market hours and at the market. This may take a little bit of education if your people are used to picking up at your house. I had a couple of people, even though I put the new location in as many places as I possibly could, I still had a couple of people who tried to pick up at my house the first couple of weeks. So just expect that you might need to educate a little bit if you're making a change like that. Make it clear that it has to be picked up before the end of the market so that you're not complicating your setup, making exceptions, letting people pick up from your porch, things like that. Very rarely I'll have someone who has something come up or forgets, and depending on kind of my schedule, but also what I know about them, sometimes I'll make an exception and I'll let them pick up from my porch. If it is a consistent person asking for an exception, I generally stick to my guns and say it has to be picked up at the market because I can't make constant exceptions for people. So if it's just a one-off and it's something that like I know they had an unavoidable conflict and they've never asked before, I will accommodate. That's totally up to you to judge. Some people, some bakers are a lot more open to accommodating and working with special requests. I just find that I can't keep track of them all. So more or less, I just stick to my one policy and don't make exceptions. So that is one thing to consider when you're moving over to or having pre-orders at a market. Just make sure that your expectations and policies are really clear. As for pricing, I keep mine the same across all price channels, whether it's pre-order, whether it's market table, I don't change it. I like the simplicity and the predictability and that people just know what to pay. But if your market has really high fees, or if you're traveling a long way, or if there are factors like that that make your market more of an investment for you, it would be okay to bump your prices up slightly to cover your costs, especially maybe if it's like a one-off really big holiday event and you had to pay a lot for your booth fee. I could see you bumping those prices up just a bit. Just be consistent and transparent and seek to maintain the same pricing across the board. If you're higher at a market, be higher at every market. If you are the same, just be the same all the time as much as possible. Consistency and transparency go a long way. Even if the pricing varies, as long as you are consistently varying, that'll help people know what to expect. In terms of packaging, we're going to focus more on this in part 3, where we're going to talk about kind of presentation, but plan your packaging so that it's simple and consistent and easy to transport. So try to think about if it's a bag that is really squishy, you're not going to want to, those are not stackable if it's a fragile item. I like to use like the little charcuterie boxes with the solid lids because I can stack those and they're fairly sturdy. and easier to transport in a box or a bag. I use the Costco tray boxes a lot for transportation, or the big like black and yellow Costco bins. Make sure everything's labeled clearly so that people know what they're buying without having to ask. For a lot of states, this is required anyway, that everything be labeled and packaged at home before you get to the market. If you're not sure, just Google your state's cottage laws to make sure that you know what you need to do in terms of labeling. Don't overinvest in branded bags or boxes or extra labels or stickers. People aren't going to buy your bread just because it has a ribbon tied around it. That could be really cute for presentation, but they're just as likely to buy it if it's just a clean craft brown paper bag with a window and a simple sticker that looks professional. All your products look consistent, and it clearly communicates what they're getting. Another part of your prep that can go a long way is to pack your car the same way more or less every time. That's part of your system, so you don't have to rethink it every time. You can create a market checklist so you don't forget your sign-in, your card reader. Last week, I forgot my little external battery that I use for my POS. If I had looked at my market checklist, that wouldn't have happened. But generally, I keep everything like that in one large tote bag, and I just leave it there all the time. I do have to remember to pull out my iPad to charge it and that battery to charge it, and then put it back in the bag. But more or less, I keep everything all together. I keep my price tags in there. I have some extra scissors, bungee cords, my cash box, all together so that I don't have to rethink and go through my checklist every single week to make sure that I didn't forget something. If you're just getting used to this and you're not sure what should be on your checklist, I do have a market checklist, and I'll put that down in the show notes. It's just a good general list of things that you'll want to make sure you remember, like your canopy and the weights and a chair, your table, a tablecloth. I've forgotten my tablecloth before. All of those things, especially if you are like throwing your tablecloth in the wash between markets, you're going to want to go back to that checklist and make sure if it's not in the place where it normally would be, that you're not forgetting to go grab it, coming from experience. Okay, with all of that prep talk, let's talk about timing, because planning your week matters so much in terms of how you show up on market week. I like to reverse engineer my schedule. So I know that my market starts at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. That means I need to arrive there at about 8 o'clock on Saturday morning in order to have plenty of time to get all set up before people start showing up. That means that everything needs to be packed up and loaded in my car by about 7:30. I need to leave myself time to make my coffee and eat some breakfast and shower if I need to. So in general, I try to have absolutely everything, with sometimes a couple of exceptions, baked, cooled, packaged on Friday night. The exceptions would be a lot of times I will wake up at 5:30 or 6 on market day and bake my cookies. And then if I have a specialty treat like the brioche buns, I bake those early Saturday morning too, because those really are best fresh. Every single one of my products is baked within 24 hours of the market, so it's all fresh. 24 hours is the general rule of thumb. But I am not staying up all night to bake. I am baking the majority of Friday. Sleeping, generally, I shoot for a solid 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours of sleep before market day. And so, again, to go back to reverse engineering, I pop my cookies in the oven at 5:45 when the oven's hot. And while they're baking, I prep whatever other thing might need to go in. In this example that I've just shared, it was my brioche bun, so add whatever toppings I needed to add and have those ready to go in the oven right after the cookies come out. I have a little like oscillating tabletop fan, and sometimes I'll pop that on the table and help cool the cookies so that I'm not sitting around waiting for them to cool to package. Now, the cookies do cool fast, so usually while they're cooling, I take a shower, I load the car, and utilize that time. And then I just have the boxes already pre-labeled, ready to go. And so as soon as they're cool, I just pop them in, and that's my last thing to load. So going back to reverse engineering, I've plotted out my Saturday, and I know that Friday is my bake day, which means that I'm going to be baking everything on Friday, and I need to give myself enough time to have it fully cooled so I can package it. in time to sleep. That means that I generally want everything packaged no later than like 8 p.m. And if it takes about 4 hours for the biggest bread to cool, those have to be out of the oven no later than 4 p.m. to get them fully cooled, assuming that those are the last things out of the oven. Usually they're not, but fully cooled and packaged. So more often than not, I start baking for a Saturday market at about 9:30, 10 on Friday morning, and I get all of my rustic breads in the oven. I have my sandwich bread cold proofing in bins. And so I dump that out while my first load is in the oven and pre-shape it and then pop those into my sandwich loaf tins and let those kind of puff up for a little bit of a second rise for usually 2 hours or so is what they usually take. When I put the sandwich bread, and I do this with focaccia and English muffins as well, but I mix it in the mixer. I do 3 rounds of stretch and folds, and then I put it straight into the very cold fridge. Sometimes I even knock it down to freezer mode to make sure it's super cold so that dough doesn't continue to proof and overproof in the fridge. I get it real cold as fast as possible, and I fridge it early because I know that mass of dough is going to keep proofing in the fridge. And if I trap the heat with a lid, or if I let it proof on the counter too long, then it will keep proofing too far in the fridge. So I pop it in the fridge, I leave the lid off for a little bit to let it really cool, and then I pull it out on Friday morning, pre-shape, and let it second proof on the countertop while my other breads are baking. Like I said, I do that with my focaccia too. So focaccia is the next cycle. So once I have the second load of bread in the oven, I would dump the focaccia and portion that out into my 8x8 pans and let that be proofing. And that's usually one of the last things out of the oven. And then English muffins, sometimes I shape these ahead of time and just have the dough balls shaped on cookie sheets with a lid so that I just need to pull those out and let them go through their second proof. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I shape those on bake day. I will say when I shape them ahead of time, bake day flows a little more smoothly. So ideally, I'm not leaving that task to bake day as well. So my general flow then, I'm putting my batards in the oven, my rustic original sourdough, and every 35 minutes I'm rotating the loads of bread. That usually takes about 4 rounds. And while those are going in and out, I'm prepping the other things. Focaccia. Pizza dough is another one. I cold proof it in a bin, and then I dump it out and ambient, let it go through its second proof in a flat bin or a cookie sheet, covered up while everything else is baking. And my room, my little bakery room, gets pretty warm, so those usually just take a couple of hours to be ready. So by the time all of my original loaves are out of the oven, then I put my inclusion loaves in, and once those are out, the first round of originals are usually pretty well cooled down. And my sandwich loaves are going in, so I can start packaging my originals, get those off the cooling rack to free up some space and into bins and get a jump on packaging. And so I'm doing a lot all at once, but it's kind of organized chaos and trying to stay ahead of packaging as much as possible. Once a kind of group of product is fully cool, I try to pop those in bags and get them into bins to free up space on the cooling rack. I use a bun rack, a 20-sheet bun rack that's, I think they're like 6 feet tall, and they hold 20 full-size sheet pans. And I use 12 sheet pans with cooling trays on them as my cooling rack. So it takes up a small footprint because it's tall, and I can cool a lot, like 6 loaves of bread per tray. So 12 trays, I can cool 72 loaves of bread total, roughly. One thing that really helps on bake day is having all of my labels pre-printed. So this is one thing that I tend to try to do earlier in the week, and it's a quick process. If I sit down with this on Monday or Tuesday, when I have just a gap of time, I can sit down and get all of my labels printed out, organized so that they are ready to go. And then maybe on Wednesday, I sit down and I stick the labels on, or I let my kids help they love to earn a couple dollars sticking labels on bags. And then those are ready to go for bake day. All I need to do is grab the right product, and once it's cool, I stick it in the bag. One little note that I've observed personally, I put my original loaves in the large black and yellow Costco bins, and I can put 12 loaves per layer, but I don't like to stack them overnight because I found that the weight of the second layer of bread squishes the first loaves on the bottom. So I keep the 12 loaves that are going to go on that second layer, and I set them aside and I put them like on a table or something. And then I just put them on the second layer in the bin on Saturday morning before I head to the market. Just a little personal note, side note there that I've observed. So hopefully this helps you understand the flow. I am always thinking about what's going into the oven next, what's coming out of the oven. There are always several timers set so that I don't lose track of anything, because I have a tendency towards the end of the day especially to forget to set the timer. So I'm very diligent about keeping that timer going and making sure that I, even if it's just like it just needs 2 more minutes sort of thing, actually setting the timer for 2 more minutes so that I don't forget and come back to crispy something. So generally I bake from about 10 a.m. to 3 or 4. And then the oven goes off, and at that point, I oftentimes will sit down, take a breather for a minute while the rest of the products finish cooling. And then I will package a little more before dinner, sit down with the family for dinner, and finish packaging before bed. Have everything put in bins and usually moved over towards the door so that all I need to do on Saturday morning is finish whatever those few things that need to be baked and packaged are, and load up the car and then get myself ready. That's my Saturday and Friday timeline. Now, dough prep happens for me on Wednesday and Thursday. I like to spread it out just to keep it more manageable. I find that I could get it all done on Thursday, but that makes for a really long dough day and a whole lot of dishes. If I spread it out between Wednesday and Thursday, it feels a lot more manageable. I can stay on top of dishes a little bit better, and it's 2 5-hour days, sometimes 6, rather than 1 12-hour day. Just feels a lot more doable. So I tend to just look at my menu and decide how I'm going to split it up and think about the products that do better with a longer amount of time in the fridge versus the ones that don't. So I know that I like my English muffins better if they do not get a super long cold ferment. I prefer them without a super tangy sour flavor, so those go on my second dough day on Thursday rather than on Wednesday. My original sourdough, just my rustic batards, I mix up on the first day on Wednesday, and those do great in the fridge as long as they are cold-proofed cold enough to not overproof during that time in the fridge. My fridge maintains its temperature really well. I use an Equard temperature controller to keep it really cold at about 34 degrees. I found that warmer than that, if the fridge is like 37, 38, that those loaves continue proofing too much in the fridge and they don't have as much of a rise when they're baked as I prefer. So I like to fridge them just a tad on the early side, not too far, but allow them just a little bit of wiggle room to finish proofing in the fridge and then get cold super fast and make sure that they're going to stay super cold. I also mix up my pizza dough on Wednesdays because that does well with a little bit of a longer cold ferment, and that goes into a bin and into the fridge. Things like muffin batter do pretty well in the fridge, so I'll mix those up on the first of my dough days. I like my sandwich bread usually on my second day, so that usually gets mixed on Thursdays, as well as my English muffins, and usually my inclusion bread happens on the second day as well. When I was getting started, I didn't split it into 2 dough days most of the time. When I had lower quantities, it made sense to do it all in one day. Now that my quantities have increased quite a bit, it just feels a lot smoother to split it up. And then the very first part of the week, Monday is usually very minimal kitchen. I start to bulk up my starter that's been in the fridge. Maybe I brown some butter. Maybe I print some labels. Usually on Monday or Tuesday, most of the time Tuesday, I will make my crackers and granola because those stay really nicely in an airtight container all week. And so it's spread out, but not so much that I feel like I am spreading myself too thin and spending chunks of time all week long. It's very strategic. I tend to be a pretty involved planner when I want to be. Sometimes I'm very spontaneous, but I like to sit down with a piece of paper. And I did this especially when I was first getting started to map it all out really clearly. But like I talked about reverse engineering, I would lay out every single day that I had leading up to an event and the blocks of hours, and then drop each of the prep tasks into a block. So that would be my encouragement to you if you're still having a hard time wrapping your mind around it. Figure out all the things that need to happen. So from bulking up your starter to pre-measuring your ingredients to mixing your dough to shaping your dough to printing your labels to baking to cooling to packaging, all of those things, then estimate how much time they'll take. Overestimate. Give yourself a buffer of 25 to 30% extra time because it's always going to take more time. And then start to drop those into chunks of time. Let sleep be a non-negotiable. Let family priorities be a non-negotiable, whether that's family dinner. Don't let those become sacrificed in the name of baking a little bit more. Your first markets are always going to feel the most chaotic. It's going to take the most thinking, the most planning, and then the more you repeat, the more you're going to have some data to go off of, and you'll figure out which systems work and which ones don't, and they will become much smoother over time. So if the first one feels crazy, stick with it, give yourself a couple more times, and you'll find that it smooths out over time. All right, that was a lot. That was a lot about timing. I could have made a whole entire episode breaking down every single detail of my own prep days. I don't think that's going to be super, super helpful. I think kind of understanding principles and best practices and what works well for me and what doesn't is probably more helpful because my context is different, my capacity is different. The quantities that I bring are going to be different from yours. I bring a lot of products now, but like I said, I started out my first market with a very minimal menu. And everything that I bring now is very strategic, and I have practiced enough to know what works and what doesn't and what's too much for me to manage. And sometimes I push it, and that's how I learn. Sometimes like the top end of my capacity, sometimes I have to reach that to know that I can't push beyond it with my current context. I would encourage you to just pay attention to the same thing. Just be really mindful. Keep a lot of notes about what feels good, what doesn't, what worked well, what really didn't. If you try something that I recommend and you don't like it at all, don't use it. Stick with what works well for you. You do not have to use all of my methods just because I'm the one sharing it on a podcast and it works for me. There are as many ways to bake, as many ways to prep as there are bakers, and it's not a one size fits all. But with all that said, markets are a learning process. Knowing how much to bring, how much to prep, it gets easier over time. So if your first one feels chaotic and crazy, stick with it, give yourself grace, and know that your systems will get smoother, you will know what to expect better, and some of that mystery will disappear a little bit. So let's wrap a bow on this. This one's really long already, and recap with just a little checklist of preparing for a great market. So first up, bring a mix of staples, seasonal, and add-on products. Pay attention to what people are asking for. Don't try to bring all the things every single week, but you can rotate it. But a good little mix is going to keep people coming back, keep them interested with those seasonal or specialty items, and up your average order value with those small add-ons. When they add on a cookie to their loaf, your order could just go from $10 to $16 very easily. Secondly, start small. Track your sales patterns. Pay attention to the patterns that you observe and let that inform your next markets. Third, keep your pricing consistent. Don't be all over the place and repricing at every single market. Show up in a way that customers know what to expect. And consider pre-orders if they're helpful. If they feel complicated or like adding something that you're not ready for, don't worry about it. They are not required. Fourth, keep your packaging and your labels clean, consistent, professional. and create a system that's repeatable. Simplify labeling as much as possible because it is a time suck. As much as you can cut out the extra labels, ribbons, bows, things like that, and still have a clean, consistent, professional product, the easier your bake day and packaging will flow. Like I said, these all take some time the first few rounds. They become second nature over time. They will become much more natural and you won't have to think and revisit it every single week. It's no secret that I love my market. I'm absolutely knackered by the end of a market day. I go home and I eat a sandwich and take a nap every week. But I go home energized with all of the connections and the conversations and just knowing how cool of a job this is and getting to do it each week or every 2 weeks. It's energizing, it's fun, it's fulfilling, it's rewarding. And I have created a lot of systems that preserve that joy and don't drain it. And that is my encouragement to you. Just pay attention to how we can support your energy so that all you need at the end is a quick nap to be recharged rather than a full 3 weeks of a break. We're coming up on the holiday season where there are a lot of market opportunities. So like I mentioned at the start of the episode, if you want to create a clear and profitable plan for your holiday markets, including what to bake, how much to bring, how to prep efficiently, how to set your goals. We're going to talk about all of that inside the Holiday Accelerator. So the Breadwinner Holiday Accelerator is that free online event that I talked about. You can grab your free tickets at carolinebauer.com/holiday accelerator or the link down in the show notes. And I would love to see you there. Like I mentioned, there is the free ticket for everyone. You can upgrade your ticket if you want to and get some extra bonuses and lifetime access to the recordings. But it's open to anyone. And I am excited to just hit pause at the end of October, take a deep breath and regroup so that we can approach November and December with a clear plan and strategy to make the most of it without burning out. Next week, we're going to wrap up this 3-part market series by talking about the booth itself. We're going to talk about setting up the booth, presentation, sign up, connecting with customers, packaging, and what it really takes to stand out in a sea of vendors. I'm excited for that conversation, so I'll be back with that soon. But in the meantime, happy baking.